Welcome, my family. Before we jump in, make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends and family. I'd also love to know where are you watching from and what time is it there. Please hype me on YouTube. Thanks.
You know, there's something strangely fascinating that happens to a few people. They step into a room and instantly sense everything. The unspoken tension between two friends, the quiet sadness tucked behind a smile. We're often told that this is a gift, aren't we? This ability to notice what others overlook. Alan, but today I want to suggest something very different. That this variability, this clarity of perception, might actually be the most dangerous thing you'll ever have. Alan, I'm not talking about danger in the usual sense. Not about getting hurt physically. Alan, I mean something much more subtle and far more devastating. The danger of becoming so aware that you can no longer join in the blissful unawareness that helps most people live in peace. Have you ever watched people at a party? Really watched them? They're all playing a game, you see. Alan, everyone knows the rules, even though no one ever explains them. Alan, you ask someone how they are, they smile and say, "I'm fine." And both of you pretend that's a complete answer. You compliment the host, laugh at jokes that aren't really funny, nod along to stories you've already heard. It's a quiet agreement to keep things light, to stay on the surface, to avoid looking too deeply. But then there's you, the one who notices everything. You see the wife flinch ever so slightly when her husband speaks. You sense the colleague who feels crushingly alone despite the crowd around them. You can feel the unease drifting through the room like an unseen current. And that's where the danger begins. Because once you've seen these things, you can't unsee them. Alan, worse still, your very presence becomes a mirror that others find too uncomfortable to face. Let me explain. When you see clearly, when you pick up on what others have silently agreed to ignore, you disrupt the illusion everyone depends on. And people don't like that. Not because they're bad or foolish, but because your awareness threatens the fragile structure that keeps their world intact. Think of society as a grand stage play. Alan, everyone has their role. The successful businessman, the loving mother, the dependable friend. These are roles, costumes we wear. And the play runs smoothly as long as everyone stays in character. But you, with your piercing awareness, you're like someone who stands up in the middle of the play and shouts, "That's not real. They're just actors." You can imagine how unwelcome that makes you. The first danger then is isolation, and not the simple loneliness of not having enough friends. Alan, I mean something much deeper, the isolation of living in a completely different reality from everyone else. You're speaking a language no one else understands, seeing a world no one else perceives. The cruel irony is that the clearer your vision becomes, the more alone you feel. Alan, I once knew a woman, let's call her Sarah, who had this uncanny ability to read people. She could enter a room and instantly know who was sincere, who was faking, who was in pain, and who was pretending to be fine. She could sense who could be trusted and who was hiding something. And you know what happened to her? She lost every close relationship she had. Not because she was harsh or judgmental, but because people felt exposed around her. They couldn't keep their masks on when she was near. All and her friends would say, "You're too intense. You overthink everything. Can't you just relax and have fun?" But she couldn't. It's like asking clearly isn't something you can switch off. It's like asking someone with perfect hearing to just ignore sound. Once you develop this kind of perception, it's always there, always active, always revealing what others desperately try to conceal. And that leads to the second danger. When you can see the truth beneath appearances, when you truly grasp what's happening under the surface, you're forced into a painful decision. Do you speak or stay silent? If you speak, you risk being attacked. Not always physically, but often in a psychological sense that cuts just as deep. You'll be called negative, overly sensitive, or a troublemaker. You'll be accused of inventing problems that don't exist, of twisting innocent situations into something dark. Alan, of being unable to simply let things go. But if you choose silence, if you swallow what you see and pretend not to notice, you begin to lose touch with yourself. Because every time you deny your own perception, every time you accept someone else's version of reality, when you know it's false, you're essentially telling yourself that your own Alan experience cannot be trusted. And slowly that creates a kind of fracture within you. One part of you knows the truth, while another must act as if it doesn't. This is a form of quiet madness. Alan, I remember sitting in a meeting years ago where everyone was congratulating themselves on how well a project was going. Alan, and yet I could see plain as day that it was about to fall apart. The warning signs were obvious, the forced enthusiasm. Alan, the way certain subjects were carefully avoided, the way eyes darted away whenever tough questions surfaced. When I gently suggested that perhaps we should take a closer look at some worrying patterns, the reaction wasn't reasoned disagreement. It was pure, defensive hostility. And that brings us to the third danger, the most insidious one of all. When you see things clearly and others refuse to, their discomfort often turns into anger, and that anger finds its target in you. Not intentionally, perhaps. They won't consciously decide to make you the villain, but unconsciously they'll begin to treat you as the source of the problem, as though your awareness is somehow causing the very dysfunction you've merely noticed. It's what I call shooting the messenger. When someone dares to point out that the emperor has no clothes, Alan, the crowd doesn't thank them for their honesty. The crowd turns on them for disturbing their comfortable illusion. Your clarity becomes a threat, and threats must be controlled or destroyed. I've seen this pattern repeat endlessly. The person who sees too much is quickly labeled. They're too negative, too dramatic, too unstable, too intense. They need to lighten up. They're paranoid. Notice how all these labels share a single purpose: to suggest that the problem lies with the perceiver, not with what's being perceived. It's an ingenious defense mechanism, really. If people can convince you that your perception is flawed, they never have to face what you've actually seen. But here's the part no one talks about: the fourth danger, and perhaps the most devastating one. When you're constantly absorbing the emotions and hidden truths of everyone around you, when you're perpetually tuned into what's unspoken and unresolved, lose track of what's actually yours, your feelings blur into everyone else's. You might walk into a room feeling fine and leave weighed down with anxiety, sadness, Alan, or anger, and have no idea whether those emotions belong to you, or if you've simply absorbed them like a sponge, soaking up other people's moods. It's draining beyond measure. Alan, imagine never being sure which thoughts are yours, never certain whether the emotion you're feeling comes from within or from someone sitting across the room. It's like trying to hear your own voice in a crowded hall where everyone's talking at once. Eventually, you forget what your voice even sounds like. Alan, I've spoken with people who live this way, and they all describe the same feeling. I'm disappearing. There's less and less of me, and more of everyone else. And this isn't poetic exaggeration, it's a real psychological danger. Alan, when the boundary between self and others becomes too thin, when you take in too much of the world without knowing how to protect yourself, you begin to lose touch with your own center, your own identity. Now, you might be thinking this all sounds bleak. Is there really no hope for those who see clearly? And that's where things start to get interesting. Alan, because the danger I'm describing is only truly dangerous when it remains unconscious, when you don't understand what's happening to you, when you start to believe that you're losing your mind or that something is wrong with you. But once you recognize what's really going on, once you realize that your clarity isn't a flaw but a unique kind of awareness, Alan, not because the seeing stops, but because your relationship with it transforms. You begin to understand that you're not responsible for rescuing everyone from their own unconsciousness. You don't have to point out every hidden truth or fix every unspoken problem. You see, the real danger isn't in the seeing itself. It's in the urge to act on everything you see. The belief that if you notice pain, you must heal it. If you detect dysfunction, you must correct it. That's where the true exhaustion begins, because you start taking responsibility for what isn't yours to carry. Let me paint a picture for you. Imagine walking beside a river and noticing the water is muddy. You see it clearly. Alan, everyone else seems unaware, or maybe they just don't care. Now, you have a choice. You could jump in and try to clear the water with your hands, stirring it up even more, exhausting yourself in a hopeless effort. Or you could simply acknowledge that the water is muddy, make a mental note that it's not wise to drink from it right now, and keep walking. In time, when the conditions are right, the water will clear on its own. Your frantic stirring won't help. It will only make things worse. Alan, this is the wisdom that must accompany clear, seeing, the understanding that not everything you perceive needs your intervention. Alan, but here's the paradox. Once you stop trying to fix everything, once you relax into simply being aware without the need to control or correct, Alan, your perception actually becomes sharper. More than that, people start feeling safer around you, because you're no longer unconsciously demanding that they change or see what you see. Think of it like this. When you meet someone who sees you completely but doesn't need you to be different, someone who understands your pain without trying to rescue you, who recognizes your fears without insisting you confront them, how does that feel? It feels like relief, doesn't it? Like freedom. Like you can finally breathe. That's what clear seeing becomes when it's integrated. Not a weapon used against others' unconsciousness, but a quiet gift offered through presence. You see people exactly as they are, and in that seeing, you allow them to exist without judgment. This doesn't mean you approve of everything or pretend there aren't problems. It simply means you've stopped turning other people's blindness into your personal mission. Let me be clear. I'm not suggesting that you become cold or detached. I'm not saying you should stop caring or turn your back on real suffering. What I'm suggesting is that there's a crucial difference between compassionate awareness and compulsive fixing, between seeing clearly and taking on responsibility for everything you see. The danger of perception lies not in the awareness itself, but in how you use it. If you wield it as a weapon to feel superior, to justify your isolation, to criticize others for not understanding, then yes, it becomes destructive. It breeds loneliness and disconnect. But if you can hold your clarity lightly, if you can see without grasping, perceive without controlling, understand without demanding, your awareness transforms into something healing. It becomes a gentle space where others can slowly awaken on their own terms, in their own time, without pressure or shame. And here's what I've learned after years of observing people with this rare capacity for deep perception. The ones who suffer the most are not those who see the most. They are the ones who never learned how to protect themselves while seeing. The ones who absorb everything without any filter, who take on every burden they notice, who wear themselves out trying to awaken a world that isn't ready to wake up. The ones who truly thrive, the ones who manage to use their perception without being destroyed by it, have discovered something vital. They've learned how to exist times and times the world without becoming times of times it. They can see with clarity without being consumed by what they see. They can feel deeply without losing themselves inside other people's experiences. They maintain what you might call a conscious distance, not the cold detachment of withdrawal, but the gentle space created by healthy boundaries. And how does one learn that? It begins with solitude, real solitude, not just being physically alone, but allowing yourself psychological space. Time when you're not absorbing anyone else's emotions, thoughts, or problems. Time to settle like that muddy river we spoke about earlier, until your own inner water's clear, until you can distinguish which feelings belong to you and which ones you've been carrying for others. It continues with learning to trust your perception without being ruled by it. Yes, you see that your friend's marriage is unraveling. Yes, you sense your colleague's unhappiness. Yes, you can feel the tension woven into your family's silence. All of it may be true. But the real question isn't whether your perception is accurate. It's what you choose to do with that awareness. And sometimes, in fact, quite often, the wisest action is no action at all, except to hold space for truth to reveal itself in its own time. That doesn't make you indifferent or uncaring. It makes you wise. Because you understand that people awaken only when they're ready. Change happens when conditions allow it, not when you decide it should. Growth and consciousness move at their own rhythm, and almost never as quickly as we'd prefer. So here we are, at the heart of it all. The danger of seeing what others don't is real. It can isolate you, drain you, make you a target for others' defensiveness, and even cause you to lose touch with your own center. But it doesn't have to. Not if you learn to carry your awareness consciously. Not if you build the strength to see without the constant need to fix. Not if you can stay true to your own perception while still allowing others to follow their own path to awakening. The gift and the curse are two sides of the same thing. The question is whether you can hold the gift with enough wisdom that it doesn't turn into a curse. Whether you can cultivate the patience, the boundaries, and the self-knowledge needed to remain clear without being crushed by your clarity. And perhaps most importantly, whether you can find others who see as you do because they exist. Yes, there are other people living in that strange space of sensing what's hidden, of noticing what's unspoken, of perceiving life in layers others don't even realize are there. When you find these people, when you can finally be fully seen by someone who doesn't need you to dull your perception, to make them comfortable, that's when the danger begins to transform into something beautiful. Because you realize you're not alone, you're not crazy, you're not broken, you're simply awake in a world that mostly sleeps. And there are others who are awake too. Together, without forcing or preaching, you can hold space for awareness to spread quietly, naturally, like dawn unfolding across a sleeping city. That is the hope hidden inside the danger. That your clarity, when held wisely, it becomes not a heavy burden but a gentle light, one that invites others forward when they're ready. If they ever are. And if they're not, That's okay too. It's not your job to wake them. Your task is to remain awake yourself, to keep seeing clearly while learning to live peacefully with what you see. The danger is real, yes, but so is the possibility. The possibility of being conscious without being consumed, of seeing deeply without drowning in what you perceive, of carrying your awareness not as a curse, but as a quiet, luminous gift. And that, my friends, is the true art of living with your eyes wide open in a world that prefers to keep them closed.